Welcome, everybody, to the Relatively Relevant AI podcast. We're back with Lori Kirkland, and we're lucky enough to have Amy Andrews McMaster back with us. Say hi, Amy.
Hello, all.
All right. So last time we talked friction. Today, we're going to talk about trust, AI, and the future of everything. So help me understand, Amy, why was this a passion topic for you when we were doing our pre-gaming?
Yeah, well, I think trust is at the basis of everything. So we want to get to, mostly when we're in an organization, we're talking about getting to the results, holding people accountable, getting to the results. But at the base of what's good and what makes people commit and dig in and really get passionate is that we have trust. We care about people, right? And trust is a little scary because it's kind of a vulnerable thing. If we're going to trust someone, we're being vulnerable because we're thinking that this person might have our back, or this person understands me, or they care about me, or they know that I'm competent. And so when there's a lack of trust, we see like invulnerability. Like we're just, kind of like talking about AI, we're a little bit robotic, right? We're a little bit like, just talking about tasks and surface stuff and not the human pieces that are like, hey, how's Charlie and Addie, Lori? Like, how, what, because that hits your aliveness too, right? If I talk about your people, man, that matters. Chad, how's your dog? It's not barking right now, right? Like that hits your aliveness because you're like, I love my dog, right?
Sometimes.
So, I mean, knowing things about people and actually caring is kind of a vulnerable thing if you think about it.
Well, it's interesting too, because I like how you tap on it. It's part of the soft skills that we've kind of tried to eliminate from the workplace. We're saying, oh yes, we're a team, trust us. Here's our marketing message. But then there's unwritten rules that happen in an organization where it's really only what these leaders say is what's going to fly. Or you go in, you think maybe someone has your back, and then you find out later that they're like, they really didn't care about what you had thought you communicated, that you valued. So it does get broken really easily. And even though it is a soft skill, it's one of the most fundamental skills of people who are very successful leaders, right? There's very few high up leaders who don't have a circle of trust of, a lot of the people who work under them.
Okay, so let me take a different tact with it. So you run into a lot of leaders that have a concept of trust, but they trust themselves more than they trust anyone else or others. And it, not to go against the eternal optimist, Lori, but you have them so wrapped up in their willingness to trust themselves that they're not open to or hearing new perspectives or the challenges like we talked about in the last episode. How do you handle that in staying relevant these days?
Ooh, that's a great question. Let's tackle that together. I mean, I think that we know the feeling of like the know-it-all in the room, or like the person who kind of sucks the energy out, and we're all like, ooh, like, do we have space for other ideas, or is it only like the Amy show? And when we're in a meeting and we feel ourselves shrinking or like, kind of disengaging because someone has all the answers or is not open to input, that person doesn't know it, but they're diminishing trust, right? Because ultimately do you see people in your organization? Do you hear them? Do you understand them? Do you value them? And do you appreciate them? If it's just your show, you are really not building trust with your people. And trust is really tricky because some teams have it. Some teams have really high trust, while other teams have really low trust. And then you get those teams together and there's like, wow, what's happening here? It's not a one and done. It's like, and there's like no guarantee. Trust is an assessment. It's not, there are no guarantees, right? Like you come in and Lori gives me a dirty look and I'm like, holy shit, the story I'm making up is I pissed Lori off, right? And then do I check out, hey, Lori, do I, what is my assessment now? Trust isn't a guaranteed thing. It's a moving assessment. That's a living, breathing thing. So, how are leaders cultivating trust in their organization? How are they valuing and seeing people?
I love that saying that it's moving. Chad and I are really big on flow, right? When we talk about flow, we think about it, right? When everything in your life seems like it's really easy, when it's all going your way, things seem easy. And it's because you are living into your values. But when it comes to leaders and trust, I think in one way, leaders have to be really brave to have a lot of self-trust, right? Like you have to constantly talk to yourself and be like, okay, I have to trust myself because my neck is on the line. But I also can see that as a trap of if I'm only trusting myself, then I'm not looking at the rest of the people around me, which is then creating a really unempathetic, not trust environment. So I like your idea of it always has to be moving. And as humans, we can move so quickly. It can move from this second to this second where we need to be self-trusting and where we need to trust other people. So I love that analogy of it moving, right? Seeing what the flow of the room is, and that we as leaders need to be, ensuring that are we checking ourselves enough and getting out of our own heads to make sure that we're moving with the flow of the meeting, or we're moving with the flow of the conversation of, is it time for me to trust myself, or is it time for me to open up and look for who else I can trust in a conversation?
I think there's things we have to be careful of as well, right? There's this natural inclination in some cases for people to want to trust someone based on their position in some hierarchy rather than the way they actually show up. And I think there is this natural, it's built into the orgs. Like, well, this person's in this role, you should trust them, said everybody at Enron. And there's all of these people in these roles that, you should trust them, right? And it doesn't behoove us to fall into that pattern of, hey, this is the way it's always been. They're in that role, we should trust them, said all of Madoff's investors. Like you really just need to understand that. I think for me, trust shows up in the way somebody else shows up.
Yeah.
And kind of the realization of their character, or the living out of their character in the way they interact with others.
Yeah. Showing up is so, I love those two words so much. And listen, sometimes leaders need to show up and kind of, like you said, Lori, have the self-trust to be like, leaders have a lot going on in the background, right? There's a million things that maybe their team members don't know about it. And so sometimes they're going to come out strong and highlighting an idea. And maybe they say, hey, I need to push hard on this one because we're nearing, so sometimes that self-trust is high. And other times the collaboration needs to be. So it's like this, and how do we discern whether we need to go for the collaborative approach or whether we need to do the self-trust approach? Like it's, where's the harmony?
And it requires constant evaluation.
Yes.
Like it changes. We've all seen it. You see it change in the course of a meeting, right?
Right.
Like you go in, it's a high trust environment. Somebody does something that steps on somebody else's pattern, sets off a trigger. Room gets temperature changes, something happens, now the trust goes out the window. And so I think for leaders to be relevant in the face of all the changes happening with the influx of like AI and quantum computing and all that, you're going to have to go one step above and beyond. Like you're going to have to be much more comfortable floating, right, in a fluidity that right now I think leaders struggle with. If it's just grounded, they struggle with that trust, either giving the trust to their teams or trusting themselves or trusting the guidance they're being given. And I think that's going to continue it's going to be much more of a fluid situation.
Yeah.
You know what? Or go ahead.
Have you ever been in a meeting where, like you were saying, Chad, the energy changes? Someone's toes got stepped on, and everyone can kind of feel it, and they're like, "Ooh, I don't want to be the target of so and so's having a bad day, or I'm gonna just keep my mouth shut." Versus someone actually saying, "Wow, the energy in the room just changed. What are we noticing right now?" Like to actually do like an energy scan around pausing to check in with the collective energy in the room, to say something like, let's just notice does anyone else notice a shift? It just felt like something shifted.
Did it just get cold in here?
I'm freezing. Do you have a blanket?
I think there's something around stability too. Like for so long in the workplace, we've been like, this is how it works. This is what the procedure is. When somebody says this, I listen to that and it goes in order. But now things are changing. Like we're watching with AI, there's going to be so many changes. And I'm sorry, a car horn's going off. But we're watching, right? We're watching technology change. We're watching companies suffer where they're laying, for instance, a lot of the tech layoffs, they're laying people off, but they don't have another playbook of how are they going to be. So like what was once, as you said, Chad, a grounded place is now going to be changing. So we need to think of trust as, right, where do we go for the one next step? If our ground is changing, we have to start becoming aware of the energy around us, of the people around us, so that as the energy changes, we have at least the self-power to make sure we're not just shutting off and, kind of being a quiet quitter type of stuff, because nobody really wants that. So it is around finding stability, but knowing that in a changing world, stability means, right, owning the next step and being a little bit more aware, not afraid, but just aware of where the ground is.
Cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. And I think stability is tricky with AI right now, because I think people are not feeling stable. They're feeling a sense of uncertainty, like what, I just need to, and then so there's kind of this uncertainty with AI, like, what is this going to replace my job? And that can feel very the opposite of stable. And so then people just armor up and pretend like, I have it figured out, or, whereas I think we should be saying, yeah, there's some uncertainty here. How are we feeling about this uncertainty? How are we interacting with this uncertainty? How do we explore, what are some ways we're, leaning in instead of leaning out?
Yeah. And then you have to be careful with the tech too, because the AI is, as everybody knows, it hallucinates or lies or just makes crap up all the time. But you have to understand when you can and when you can't trust the tech. But you also have to understand when you can and can't trust what you're being told internally about the tech. So organizations, I don't think yet have a full handle on what the AI influx is going to mean. A lot of them are treating it like another gear in the machine. Oh, hey, this will increase productivity. That's great. We're going to automate some tasks. And I understand why they're doing it, because that's the easiest use case. But the ability to use it let's talk in the case of trust, as kind of an emotional feedback loop for myself. I think of read.ai and the way it measures intent and engagement inside of meetings. That gives me an opportunity to look at it and go, hey, I'm not asking it to define some future physics equation and I have to worry about it hallucinating. I'm asking it to analyze based on what it's been trained on, my interactions, and help me understand, am I showing up the way I think I am? Am I bringing the right energy into the conversation? Is it too much energy at times, which is often my problem? And so it's this ability to get an unbiased feedback loop that would help me get better, to be in a better situation, a better space, to extend trust or accept trust from others.
I love that it gives you a read on the way that you're showing up, because if, and I don't know the accuracy level of this, but how cool to be able to review a meeting and kind of get those emotional data points with, here's where the energy was high, or here's, that's fascinating way to use AI weaving in with, trust and showing up and emotional intelligence.
I think it also opens up a space for people to use it in situations like, I'll think coaching situations, right? You have to have a bond. You have to have a trust if you're going to truly be coached. But even with that bond, there's still, and I'll think of myself instead of put it on others, where even when I'm talking to somebody who's been a coach of mine and a best friend of mine for over 15 years, I still have this noise going on about, well, am I about to say something where Jerry's going to think I'm stupid? Or I wonder if he's judging me right now. Or, its facial expression changed. And now I'm pretty sure he thinks that I'm an idiot. And that's taking up noise, right? It's creating noise and energy drain in the background. Whereas I can pressure test some of my ideas with an AI. I don't have that kind of judgment fear going on. And I can at least have a sounding board before I go to the sounding board to make those interactions with that live coach even that much better and even that much more impactful.
Yeah.
And I think you're tapping on something which is really important, which is one of the things that I think just with the change that's needed going from industrial management style of working to the AI changes and everything beyond, right? And trust is that we need to start focusing on what is really important to you. The idea of purpose driven for a long time really sounded fluffy, but organizations
Purpose washed it.
They purpose washed it. But organizations and leaders, the more clear they are on the destination, both you for yourself as well as your organization, that can really help you deal with all of the changes that are happening. And then, like you said, Chad, you do the AI enhanced where human, human augmentation, where you're like, hey, you know what? I had this really tough meeting and Amy suggested that I should have been up and brave, but I didn't do it during the meeting. But I'm going to see I thought of the perfect thing to say. I'm going to put it in to see what the response would have been if I described the situation, right? Then you do have some ways to, even if it's just completing for yourself, hey, I've completed a situation. That's great. So I don't have to go into the next meeting with it. Or it might give you opportunities and ways of being that you hadn't thought of before because you're able to ask it without having to have all of the right, talking points, tone, the normal judgments that are running through the patterns that are always running through our head.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really a valuable tool to kind of role play with or get some instant, pretty smart feedback, not wise or knowing me feedback, but to get and to, it's almost like self-coaching, self-trust. Let's bring in that word trust. It's like cultivating some self-trust. If I, what did I do well? What could I have done better? You're kind of cultivating self-trust, and that builds some grounded confidence that maybe next time I could try this, or, because I think self-trust leads to greater interpersonal trust.
Yeah. Well, and think about it like this. So we've all been in those brainstorming sessions, right? And let's say it's an hour, let's say it's a 2-hour brainstorming session. And inside of that 2 hours, there's magic. And that magic happens maybe in a 10-minute spot here or a 20-minute spot here, but there's a lot of grind that goes on, right? So maybe now, instead of doing that grind as much with the rest of the team, I sit down with an AI, I go, hey, here are my initial thoughts on this. And I go back and forth, kind of get refinement. So now when I come into those brainstorming sessions, I've already had some pre-processing going on. I've got some ideas to float that may be a little bit more formulated or maybe able to be taken apart and reassembled in new ways. And I'm wondering, I haven't done it yet. I look forward to being able to, using it as like a pre-processor for I'm going into a brainstorming or a creativity session, or we're going into a planning session and we have to figure out what the strategic initiatives are going to be. And if I spent 5 minutes with it, just, talking to it or typing things in and going back and forth and iterating and using it as a partner, it almost becomes like spell check for my ideas before I take them into the session itself.
I like
spell
that.
check for my ideas. Bam. I love that.
I got them coming all day long.
Were you going to say something, Lori?
I just was, as you were saying that, and we're talking about trust in AI, I'm also then thinking about how important just the human to human skill it is. And then I want to bring up to you guys, right? We're in a world right now that feels like it's divided on so many levels, whether it's in the US, whether it's in the world, whether it's religion, politics, you name it. It feels like we're divided, and it feels like we have created a society where there's not trust right now. And then you add something like AI on it, where people are very fearful of it. But having been a technologist for 25 years, I think it goes back to trusting humanity, because the technology is only as good as what the actual humans put into it. So let me ask you guys, how would you address in the corporate workplace, right, some of the distrust that is out in the world, the world today? That's a light question for you.
That's a
Very
light
light.
question.
So light. Wow.
You know what? I'll tell you what I honestly think is, I think much like what we see inside of organizations or with processes and all of these things, I think we have overcomplicated what is
Yes.
essentially an extremely simple situation. And that is, instead of, all of the people identifying with their history, their religion, or different genders, you start with a baseline. We are all human beings. And as a result, we all have shared fears, concerns, desires. They may not all be exactly the same, but there's a baseline there, a big overlap in your Venn diagram, if you will. Let's just start there. And as a result, human beings deserve a certain level of respect, a space to be heard, seen, and interacted with. And then I have a tendency to stop there and judge based on behaviors as a result of that. That's kind of my default. I would just simply say, make it simpler. It's not as complicated as we have a tendency to make it.
I love that. I agree 100%. I want to sprinkle in a few things, do some sprinkles on top. So 100% with what actually matters to people. Like, take away the titles, take away the contentious labels, and you have values, you have needs, you have fears. Let's lean into our humanity, because heart to heart, human to human, we are so much more alike than different. So let's talk about what matters and why it matters, because that's so much more interesting than labels, right?
Absolutely.
And then the second little layer of sprinkles I want to say is there is a difference between behaviors and essence, I believe. So I think sometimes we are in behaviors from our true self, from our highest and loving, wise, heart, whole brain self, if you will. And then I think sometimes we behave from patterns. And so sometimes if you see someone behaving in a way that's like, wow, that I was really curious. I saw you doing this and I hadn't seen something like that before. Can you help me understand what was going on, or walk me through your experience there? To help people, to shine a flashlight on people's behaviors can bring them back into their true essence or their truth or their innate wisdom. That's like, oh yeah, I was running a behavior that was a pattern that I don't choose. So yeah, I've been in bad patterns. My husband will call me out all the time. Right? I don't know if you guys get called out, but
of course, we all have our patterns. That's, again, another sameness, is all of us have patterns that we created most likely by the time we were 15 that are our core patterns, right? And they're all about us going back and, thinking about those patterns, or at least seeing the patterns so we can change them. But that is a really interesting point, because you get into meetings where you're like, this pattern is going up against that pattern. And you can't see an out. Nobody can see an out, because they're such opposing patterns that it just creates a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, though, is take it back to trust. So in that situation where I'm in that meeting, I'm in that team, we all baseline that we're human. We all baseline that we deserve, respect, to be seen, a space to be heard, that we all want to understand what is purposeful for the other people. And we want to give them all those things. I also need to have the trust in that space that I can call out and say, hey, I haven't seen this from you before, and I really want to understand more. Because even that, some people would find invasive. So figuring out how to have that or incorporate that, I think, is going to be one of the huge opportunities that it presents itself as we automate all the transactional stuff and open up the room for us to have more of these types of human to human conversations.
I love the automating the transactional side of things, which is something Chad and I talk about all the time, right? Most of our businesses are, right? We've truncated people's work into these, do this transaction, this transaction, this transaction. That's going to go away. And as we embrace that, one of the opportunities we have is to stop pretending that emotions are scary and just let them be. So ideally, in the near future, we'll start seeing more spaces, because as we get rid of such truncated, kind of transactional being, what's going to happen is there's just going to be bigger conversations that need to be had, because we're going to be able to think of things, right, that will affect more people. But a big part of that is not pretending that other human beings don't have emotions or that they don't have values that need to be honored. And emotions are nothing more than your internal red, green, right? Is this going for something towards something I want to approach, or is it going towards something I want to avoid?
Increasing that awareness. I love it. All right. So as we wrap up here, couple of just key takeaways you want the audience to make sure they walk away with as we start thinking about trust, AI, and the future of everything. What would you want them to walk away with, Amy?
Trust starts with our humanity, simplicity, right? Just being in your humanity, your own, here's what matters to me. I wonder what matters to them. And really just honoring the starting place of simplicity. And, you know, if we break trust, how are we willing to repair trust, right? Because I think we know how to build trust, but what happens when we repair it? I think we need to accept that the emotional labor will be greater if we need to repair trust. And so we need to kind of get ourselves in a good place to, you know, own our part, to maybe make an apology, to maybe forgive someone, to maybe offer someone grace for their, you know, for them being in a pattern that wasn't great for them, or, you know, I think it's a learning laboratory. So how can we be in a learning laboratory together that feels safe, where we can really all be pursuing growth and trust that other people have our best interest, and be honest about what's okay with you and what's not okay, you know, being able to be vocal. And usually that starts one-on-one, right? We're not going to do it in the middle of a meeting, but saying, hey, this is something that came up for me. I'm wondering if we could have a conversation about it.
I love it. Love it. Anything you would add to that, Lori?
I love that sentiment. And I think this thing, I'd go back to finding your value and finding your purpose. So if you're in a situation where, you know, like something was triggered, like just stop and take a look around and be like, what do I really value out of this relationship? And if it's something that doesn't have anything to do with the tough part or the tough conversations, let it go. You don't value it.
I love it. All right. Thank you very much, Amy, for spending more time with us. It's been an absolute joy. Love the conversation. Thank you for investing your time with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great conversation.
All right, everybody. Until next time.